Volume-wise, very similar to last year, maybe a handful more entries. But from an entry point of view, we've increased the age, both for whites and reds. So I'd say average, there's older wines here. The producers are starting to appreciate the system and the program, so there's quite a few that are 10-year-old and older. That's what I'm doing now, is I'm opening some older vintages. We keep that till last and we pour them last. I think from a tasting point of view, there's probably more difference of opinion of when the older wines are tasted. That we leave with the judges and the panel chairs to figure out.
Yeah, we've decided to change the entry criteria for 2018. The reason purely because we want to ensure that the wines are truly exclusive to the Nederburg auction and give buyers security that when they bid high prices on these wines, that only they will have access to the wines. Red wine must now be 6 years and older, and so also for port and sweet wines. And white wines and MCC, we've changed from 2 years to 3 years.
I think it's important that the wines that show at auction are not available in the trade, so that there's something special about them. They are older wines and obviously more mature by definition, and I think that's quite important.
I think that what we're looking for is wines that have age and, more importantly, have the ability to age further. That's a critical part of the auction. People are buying these wines to age further, even if they're going to drink some of them hopefully now. To have the age 1 year more does force the producers to really consider what their choices are entering it. There isn't the opportunity, and I think especially for the white wines, to enter a youthful, vibrant wine in the hope that that will just perk up the interest in the judges and pass it as a sort of, well, at least that's fresh. And I think with the red wines, you know, they genuinely do have to show some complexity at this point. You can't just show a wine that still has that sort of last element of primary fruit. It's going to be now tertiary or secondary other characters, and therefore it has to stand on its own 2 feet. So I think that definitely forces the producer to consider very carefully what they're going to enter.
They say the main idea is to think, would you buy this wine? So okay, so I'm testing if I would buy this wine or not. But I have a different palate than most of the people inside. So it's always interesting. You have interesting discussions.
It's a first time to be a judge on the screening side, and then still retaining the hat of being the buyer. For me, the positive is to actually look at the strength of the entries. The strength of the offering is ultimately going to be dictated by the entries. And so that's a very interesting thing to look at and see how strong overall, understanding when it comes to deciding what to buy based on what the rest of the category look like. So it's going to help me a little bit in terms of if there's 1 or 2 wines that I see in the catalogue ultimately, because that'll be the first time I know who they are. And if all of those items line up in terms of the quality, etc., I may have to push even harder to purchase them. Red tasting started with Cabernet. There was quite a strong entry, but it was showcasing a period of time where we went from really mature examples, 1 or 2 interesting wines there, then the late 80s, early 90s, which was perhaps not the finest hour of South African Cabernet. Moving forward, some better examples as they became younger, but overall was a tough category. There were some really good examples, but they were few and far between.
Cabernet is one of our premium heritage grapes of South Africa, and you know, there's great pride with it, and customers want to buy it, they want to drink it, they want to age it, and we have to put the best wines through. I think we're not being more rigorous. I think we've always had the same rigorous standards, but I think perhaps expectations have grown because it's always been such a great flight. Because there's fewer Cabernets, there will be more vociferous bidding for the ones that did make it through.
Shiraz is more delicate than we've come to realize, and if you are chasing, for lack of another word, the Southeastern Australian model, the template, we don't need to make Shiraz like that. We don't need to hide the fruit behind dollops of American oak. We need to have the fruit express itself. And we saw a few of those emerging, and some very beautiful wines from roughly 2008 to 2012.
Where the interest was in the day was some rather smart Merlots, which is quite an unusual thing to say. Within the entries, there were some lovely wines. The core thing that came across with Merlot yesterday was the fact that the majority of the wine producers have stopped trying to make Cabernet Sauvignon over-extracted wines and rather work with the grape for what it's best at. Overall, it was looking quite positive, which was a really good surprise. And then Pinotage in a similar vein, showing that upward trajectory that we've seen over the last few years.
I think clearly Merlot and Pinotage Pinotage is the eternal one where one goes in with slightly low expectations and comes out, slightly more excited. There is clearly within the Pinotage producers possibly a desire to produce really clean, pure Pinotage wines. And in a way, Merlot, funnily enough, had a very high hit rate. We almost got a third of the wines through in that category. And to me, that was interesting because there was clearly some really smart Merlots in a category that is generally looked down on and frowned upon within the industry.
One of the trends I've picked up in tasting red wines this year at the Nederburg auction is that our winemakers are seeking a greater freshness or vivacity to the red wines. There's also a trend towards being more savoury. And I do appreciate that in the context, old South African wines, some of them can age beautifully to this almost red fruit fudgy richness, which we all really love. They endear themselves to us so often. However, the trend today, which is one which I do like and enjoy, and I see around the world, particularly in Spanish wines, is towards a less extracted red wine with greater refreshment value. And I think that ordinary people who buy these wines and put them aside, they appreciate that that freshness will reward them with bottle aging as well.
So Chenin as a category yesterday, some very strong entries, strong group. The consistency across the selection was very strong. And some lovely examples that we got out. Very diverse as well, which I think is important for buyers, that there's going to be something for everybody, not just a case of all one particular style.
We tasted Sauvignon Blanc, we also tasted Chenin Blanc, and unusually for me, because Chenin is such a strong category that I love, it was a little bit disappointing. Sauvignon, on the other hand, did have a surprising number of really good wines. It may just be because vintage has in the more recent past been slightly better in summer years, especially as I mentioned just prior to this 15, and there were some good wines, and I thought even some of the older wines showed extremely well.
I was surprised today by the Sauvignons, how well they'd aged. That was almost my standout flight. And if you'd said to me beforehand, what would be the best flight, I would never have said Sauvignon. And the Sauvignons were lovely. I mean, they're really well balanced, and the use of oak when it was there was very well done. And the Sauvignons are almost a kind of sleeper category. I think they're below the radar, and South Africans and auction buyers don't tend to think it's Sauvignon Blanc being something that will age very well and is worth buying, but I would urge them that they should.
Today when I tasted Chardonnay, it was quite interesting though. I found myself preferring the newer or younger vintages of Chardonnay, and I think showing the trend towards our country in producing world-class Chardonnays.
And we had a flight of 38 Chardonnays, and as they're blind, we don't know where they're coming from. I'm a foreigner, so I have a rather fixed idea from Chardonnay being from Burgundy, and then it's a different profile than the Chardonnays we tasted, but I think a lot of them were well made, technically well made, very aromatic. I think we got a nice bunch of Chardonnays out of it, and I hope people like it when they taste it also.
While our judging conditions and rigor doesn't change, what has maybe changed is that we are more aware that some of these wines are getting rarer and rarer. Private individuals are willing to spend more and more money, and we have an even greater obligation to make sure that that money is well spent.
I think if we got to that position where people were saying, this is the premium auction in South Africa, I want to hold the wines back, with a view to putting them into the auction, that would be fantastic.
What we are seeing is that people who come to the auction, especially the private buyers, they're really looking for something that's completely unique. Now, with the fact that we've increased the criteria from 5 to 6 and 2 to 3 years, it will make it more attractive for the private buyers. And I do believe that we will see new private buyers entering the auction this year because they do want to get their hands on these special items.